Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and welcome. We're broadcasting live this morning from Park City, Utah. I didn't mention it to you, Scott. I'm in Park City for the summer.
Very nice.
Scott
like
is in suburban Boston, right?
I am.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here today. For the record, this is being recorded. And if you care to review anything that you hear today and dig a little deeper, obviously we're going to put you in touch with Scott. But we'll also be posting the recording on the Family Office Insights YouTube channel. So if there's anybody in your network or a group of friends or people that would benefit from seeing it, you can find it there and you can share it with them as well. The traditional, everybody's got Zoom figured out now, but just please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and I'll be paying attention to those as Scott goes through his presentation. And as your questions come to mind, please put them in the chat box of the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can as we go along. I'm going to let Scott do his background and an introduction, but we're super delighted to have him. And they're in meeting Scott and talking about what his business is. I didn't even know such a thing existed. So it's fascinating to see what he's doing with Jaxon. And you'll see why there's a meaningful business model here shortly. So Scott, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate it. Well, hello, everyone. I will start with my background. So I've been in tech the bulk of my career. I grew up in a very entrepreneurial environment, though. And so I've always been of the business mindset. My grandfather was the CEO of a company called Sweetheart Plastics that my great-grandfather had found. It was a public company. It ended up being acquired for over $500 million in the 80s. And then my family got more into real estate, which is where I started, actually doing real estate development. I was buying up buildings in the Boston area and converting them into condos. And then this is very early on in my career. And then it took a turn deep into technology because of a big theft that occurred on one of my construction sites. So in the middle of the night, someone came into our site, took all of our equipment. It was thousands of dollars, enough to irk me and start to look for a solution. This was in 1999, and this is before everyone had the ability to put a camera on a construction site and pump it wirelessly to a predetermined site, back to your office and whatnot. There were wired connections, but we were on a construction site where there was no infrastructure yet. So I had the aha moment where, why don't we marry together what's happening with digital imaging? And this is when film was being transitioned into digital cameras. Why don't we marry that in with what we have with cell phones and the new data in the wireless realm that became available? And so for a few years there, I thought I invented the camera phone. And I was, creating prototypes, bringing it around to investors, and everyone said, "You're crazy, kid. Why would anyone want to send a picture from their cell phone to another location?" So it didn't take hold there in the consumer space, which is where I initially targeted. But 3 years into this effort, I went back to school. I was at MIT and I got a master's degree. And while I was studying there, I just by happenstance was above the police department that the class was. And I have to walk by it every day. So one day I just walked in and I said, "Hey, how do you do wireless imaging?" And they handed me a sheet of paper, which was a copy of a picture. And they handed out at roll call. And in extreme situations, they'd call everyone back to headquarters to pick up the sheet of paper. So I said, aha, I know there's a better way. And so we created one of the first, what's called be on the lookout systems for law enforcement. The ability to take an image and broadcast it out to the field in near real time, which became pretty powerful. A number of kidnappings were solved because of our platform. This is now into 2003-ish. After the the attacks in 2001, the Department of Homeland Security put forth something called the Urban Area Security Initiative. And that was to bolster the information sharing across jurisdictions, specifically around metropolitan areas. And so we morphed the technology to not just image sharing, but all data, and not just from headquarters to the field, but to the field and interoperable across all jurisdictions. Raytheon, the defense contractor, took a liking to what we were doing, picked us up as a big brother, got us into some federal and a lot of state and local initiatives, which I'll mention when I get into my Jaxon presentation, is not the only segment that we're targeting, but certainly the Department of Defense is one of them. And so I have a decent bit of background there. And then just fast forwarding a bit, we got into, and I say we, while I was at MIT, I met my business partner, our CTO, and he's essentially been the technologist for all of the companies I'm describing here, and is currently the CTO of Jaxon. So the two of us started a machine learning consulting firm because we had a great run with the wireless imaging and the interoperability data, but now AI was becoming, a reality, or the AI winter was ending, and a big emergence of opportunity in the AI space had happened, mostly because of this competition in 2012 called ImageNet, where a team of researchers coming from the University of Toronto came in and were able to beat human parity on image recognition using AI. That really woke up the industry to, hey, wait, this is something that we should revisit. Because AI has been around for a while, it just really didn't show a lot of value because of a number of issues, one of them being training data, which I'll get into in a moment here. Anyway, we started this machine learning consulting firm. It's called Big Rio, bigr.io, still thriving. Did over 20 million in revenue last year. We got it acquired in 2019. We grew it up from scratch, bootstrapped it up. It's got over 100 consultants now, all building custom machine learning models. And that's actually how Jaxon was born, is we were in the throes of doing these implementations for large customers, Fortune 500 predominantly. And we kept running into this divide around training data being the data that these artificial intelligence models, I'll just refer to as AI or models from now on, these AI models require to learn a particular subject matter, to be able to recognize the nuances between one, say, bulk of text, if it's text that we're analyzing, or one image or one segment of an image or another. And so this training data is really how the AI learns. A lot of people focus on the AI infrastructure itself, or what's referred to as neural architecture, how the AI model is designed. That's almost become a commodity though now, mostly because of academia and big tech donating to the cause like Google and Facebook, where it's no longer about the neural architecture. Now it's really about how you're going to train this neural architecture. And so when we were in the throes of doing these implementations, we kept running into this issue around how do you get training data? And the answer is, believe it or not, and I'll get into my deck here. The answer is humans. Humans sit down, believe it or not. This is the, I like to say, dirty little secret of AI. And every big company is guilty of this, including Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, what have you, where they have a bunch of humans read one example at a time. Say we're talking about Twitter. Each tweet gets read and labeled. And the labels could be a bunch of different labels. And that's all defined by the data science teams. There are some easy ones like sentiment. Do you want to apply a positive or negative or neutral sentiment to a given tweet, or a lot more complicated, like some of the work we're doing with Department of Defense. And I'll get into some of those use cases where you want to classify, is this tweet related to terrorism? Is it related to the general concept of war? Disambiguating between those two concepts actually is quite difficult. And then other categories like, is this tweet about politics, religion, the economy, what have you? And each one of these AI models needs to be told what it's classifying data into, or you can think of bucketing into categories. And again, that's what the humans are doing, is they read the example and they label it one at a time. It takes months to produce enough. And oftentimes companies will put teams, a dozen of more, sometimes hundreds of humans sitting down, reading one example at a time, paying them for every hour or for every label they produce. So there's certainly a cost associated with it. But one thing that really was an aha moment for us, and this happened around 2016, is that the humans aren't very accurate. Oftentimes these are low-wage, low-skilled labor that are employed to do these labeling tasks, and the error rate is quite high. We have looked at a lot of these data sets, and they average in the 70s of accuracy. Some of the classes, though, or some of those categories within it, can be as low as in the 20s of accuracy. The issue is the data science teams take in this mound of human labeled data as what's called ground truth, or what they use to train their models. And so a lot of AI fails in production because of this issue. They're training on an inherently flawed starting point.
So
So
Scott, can I just, because it sounds like the old adage, junk in, junk out sort of thing.
correct.
And aside from what you're about to tell us with Jaxon, the alternative to train the models, aside from Jaxon, doesn't really exist. So they don't have a choice at this point, except for what you're about to tell us. Is that pretty much it?
Well, what a lot of companies do is ignore this issue. They go a route where they're not using any labeled data, and they're letting the machine learning models try to learn in an quote unquote unsupervised way. The issue is that with that is the accuracy. It's hard for the machine learning models to pick up on the trends and patterns within the data, especially when it's nuanced data, domain specific data. We just did a big pilot with an oil and gas company, and the way that they talk is quite different. They have acronyms, they have different ways of describing things. And so typically these unsupervised platforms are great at general language. They've all been trained on things like all of Wikipedia and Common Crawl, which is the download of the web. But it's general language, it's not specific to a domain and not specific to a use case. That's really only about 10% of the AI on the market today, though, is this unsupervised approach. Most of it is supervised, which is what Jaxon is supporting, where you're training more accurate models, say a chatbot or a call transcript classifier, call transcript analytics in general. Some of the imaging stuff that I'll get into, that's predominantly powered by these labeled examples. And so absent of the labeled data that they can acquire through these human labeling efforts, they'll go out and grab open source labeled data. And that brings a whole nother set of issues in, because first of all, the accuracy. Second of all, it's not their company data that they're training their models on. And what Jaxon's really supporting are companies that are trying to own their own models, build their own models from scratch. They're growing sizable data science teams, and those data science teams aren't buying off the shelf models, they're building their own models. And if they're building their own models, they better be using their own data to train those models. And the only way to use their own data to train those models is to label it.
Got it. Continue. I'm sorry. That was
No problem.
Far better answer than I expected. Thanks.
All right, so meet Jaxon. So Jaxon starts with completely raw data. I say text here because that's our intentional focus out of the gate. We recognized a gap in the market around natural language, as it's called, really anything that's been written or spoken by a human. So raw text comes into our assembly line here, and we do have human input. We haven't eliminated humans altogether, but a drastically smaller amount of human time is needed to properly train a model using Jaxon. We just hit a benchmark where we used only 20 human labeled examples and rivaled a model that used 25,000 human labeled examples. So it really is that orders of magnitude in savings as far as the human involvement. But the humans are here to, I like to say, look over the shoulders of the model, look over the labeled output, what's coming out the other side here. Is it accurate? And if it isn't, how can we correct that? And so there's a calibration that happens. This is very much an iterative cycle where you try one pass, which will have a whole set of different algorithms that are working together to do this labeling. And then you rejig it a little bit and see if you can improve it. And then one key is to be able to ensemble all these pieces together. So each run you're creating what are called artifacts along the way. And those artifacts can be grouped together where each one can cast a vote as to what the right label is for a given example. And using machine learning models ourselves, we're aggregating those votes and picking and choosing the ones that we have the highest confidence level in. So we really try hard to make sure that the confidence and the accuracy of the labels coming out the other side is superior to humans, but also something that data science teams can trust to train their models. All right, just looking at the clock, I'm going to skip ahead here. So obviously faster, better, cheaper, a lot more consistent. Lift analysis here, I'm just going to skip down to market validation. So out of the gate, we focused in on retail. We landed Wayfair. We have a social streaming analytics company called PyQ Media. And then we landed the US Air Force. And certainly we have a number of other opportunities in the pipeline that are bubbling up, a lot of good pilots underway. But really what's taking hold and funding a lot of our efforts here are with the Department of Defense. So if I get into that a little bit here, I'm going to skip through this one real quick and get down to that. So this is our first award with the Air Force. It's taking what we're doing and specifically applying it to social media. So that description I mentioned earlier was for this use case here, where they have a mound of tweets. It lands on an intelligence analyst desk. And now, how do you filter through that? How do you find the ones that are actually relevant? How do you find the ones that are most important for a human to actually read and action on? One thing I want to make note of around this use case, and a direct correlation to some of our other go-to-market, is if you think of an investment analyst's workflow, it's very similar to an intelligence analyst workflow, and that they get a deluge of quote-unquote insights. I've spent some time digging into the hedge fund space. They're buying insights, they're getting sell-side reports, they're looking at filings, they have social media to use, and it's just a deluge of information that the investment analysts struggle to keep up with. And we talked to a hedge fund the other day, they get 2,000 emails a day of insights. So how can a human possibly keep up with all that? Another one that we're pretty excited about is called Waldo. So this is taking our platform that, as I mentioned, was initially focused on natural language into the image domain. So Space Force, believe it or not, which is real. And they're getting lots of funding now and a lot of attention, is our sponsor. So this is in collaboration with MIT. We had to be alums in order to even qualify for this. But this is called an STTR, where we're working with MIT. We own all IP rights. We give them some of their revenue in exchange for research help. And the Air Force really likes the idea of us staying with MIT. So for our phase 2, we've decided to stay with MIT. And this is specifically focused on using infrared imaging to identify hotspots on Earth. A hotspot could be a missile taking off, it could be gunfire, it could be a forest fire, anything with a heat signature that can be found from that distance. And lastly, I'm actually even more excited about this one. It's called AutoSpec. So when it comes to creating these AI models, you not only have to label the data, and one thing I should have mentioned earlier is we're not just labeling data here, we're labeling data and training models. So not only can you get labeled data out the other side, you can get these fully trained models out the other side. But in order to do that, you have to define what the problem is. So going back to that use case I was describing about the investment or the intelligence analyst, they get this mound of data. They don't even know what to look for within that. How do you find that proverbial needle in the haystack if you don't even know what the needle is? So what AutoSpec promises to do is give a starting point or a bunch of candidate options as to what the classes are within the model. So it automates that first part of the process that I was describing that the humans are adding input into. All right, let me get into more of the fundraising now. So we raised, I don't think I described this in detail. So we exited our consulting firm in March 2019, got acquired by another consulting firm. I did an earnout for 6 months and then jumped into Jaxon full bore the tail end of 2019. We had invested 1.6 million into R&D prior to the exit inside the umbrella of Big Rio, the previous company. We did an IP assignment right before the closing, and we had carve-outs for a team of 8 that we took with us at the closing. And then we raised a $1.5 million seed round last year. And that brings us to now where we're in the throes of pulling together our Series A. It's a $5 million round. We still have a convertible note open, and we're pulling in individual investors up until the time we have a signed term sheet, which we're getting close to. And the lead investors are mostly what I call patriotic money. So a lot of Metro DC area venture capital firms that appreciate all the traction that we have with DoD. And there's a whole lot more that I won't have time to get into that we have brewing with DoD. But they're looking to put in $1.5 million. It's a smaller fund. They have a lot of value they bring on the other side. They're all, ex-military and intelligence community folks. And so they're going to open up a lot of doors. And what I'm most excited about is being able to pull together a syndicate where they're leading the deal and we can have others participate. And we're in the throes of late stage due diligence now. All right, getting to the team. I mentioned a lot about myself. Greg's really been here the bulk of my career in the tech world. I mentioned we met at MIT. That was in 2003. And we've been doing various companies together since. I didn't have time to mention all of them. There were a couple more in there, also nice exits. Paul Reston here, he is the intended EVP of sales. He's not full-time yet. He is just very much in an advisory role up until we have our Series A, and then he'll jump in full bore. Most recently, he took a company called Guardium from 1.3 million to 1.3 billion. And exited to IBM. And then not just Brad, we have a whole bunch of really bright engineers that we've used along the way. Actually, most of them come from our consulting firm. As I mentioned, we took them over at the closing, but others that we had worked with even outside of that carve out that I mentioned we did for the purchase agreement, Brad being one of the shining stars. He worked with the CIA for about 5 years prior to Jaxon, focused in on deep learning, which really has only been around for about 7 years. So experience-wise, hard to compete with that. All right, I'm gonna exit out of this deck. I have a whole bunch of other things to show here, but why don't I pause for questions if there are any?
We've got a few. Scott, are you going to talk about revenue and that sort of thing and the whole bunch of other things you have to show?
Yeah, that was actually the next thing I was going to get to is a summary P&L.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see what it looks like.
So we did about 200,000 last year. This is on an accrual basis. So this is pulling into this year. This year, I think we can do a whole lot more than $1 million, but just being conservative here. Some of the DoD awards themselves are over $1 million. So certainly we can blow this out of the water, but this is what it looks like right now. Personally, I've been responsible for bringing in over 5 million a year for the past 7 years. So I feel confident in my ability to do this alone, but with the right funding and actually getting some help on the sales and go to market, I'm very confident that we'll blow through these numbers. And all of this is in a spreadsheet I'm happy to share with people. I broke it down by customer with all real customers that are in our pipeline and project them out, based off of the deal size that they have.
Nice. You're probably going to get to it, but is there just printing money, staying in the business, improving the engine, keeping hold of the secret sauce? Or is there and I'm not suggesting you can prognosticate with accuracy, but do you feel there's an exit, or are you just going to keep on printing money?
It's almost as if we're in sync. So here's the spreadsheet that I have analyzing.
We didn't practice this.
We didn't. No, this is perfect.
Yeah.
So I've dug into, what's the M&A activity in the space, and certainly that's our goal here, is to sell the company when the time is right. If you look at similar companies that have exited, and there are some obvious buyers out there, the big cloud providers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM are likely potential exit, but certainly the big tech houses and some of the competitors that we have in the form of human labeling shops are also recognizing that their time is coming up where they have to start embracing AI. And so companies like Lionbridge and Appen are good examples of that. But there's some decent sized exits here. On average, they're over 200 million.
Yeah. Do you think that the DoD part of your business could dwarf the rest of it if
we got picked? So we won our first award, and then we got picked up by an accelerator at Hanscom, which is an Air Force base in Massachusetts. And they've been courting us and helping us and surrounding us with all the right advisors to march us down the path here. It's very much because of the competitive pressures coming from China and Russia that they've recognized that AI is a thing, and they need to start embracing it. They just announced they're putting $900 million into the 2022 budget just for AI implementations, just for the kind of things that Jaxon does.
Wow.
So they actually advocate that we carve off a separate division, that once we get to a point, they call it a phase 3. Once we get to a phase 3, which is a $64 million project, we sell off the federal division. And that's, a very likely outcome. Could it dwarf the enterprise side? Not in my pro forma, but yes, it could. The way I have it right now is my thinking is it's roughly a split revenue-wise. But I just want to make note that the DoD stuff comes with professional services, and the enterprise is pure license deals.
I see. Yeah.
DoD doesn't really have data science teams to implement this yet.
Yeah. So there's another revenue stream embedded in those projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We can talk about this more later, because I remember mentioning it to you and not doing anything about it. But my friend Dan, who has that budget, who you wanted to meet, who I can't remember his last name, but he's with
Ensign.
Yeah. Is he part of that accelerator as well?
So he's trying to take technologies that are built with DoD funding inside of the DoD infrastructure and commercialize them out, as opposed to what we're doing, which is trying to build a product that they commercialize in.
Got it.
So it's the wrong flow, but he's a well plugged in guy, and I would love the introduction.
Yeah, you can totally get that. I just, like you, bandwidth issues.
Yeah.
Is the for the group here, you want to raise some money, and so I would suggest to them that if you folks find this interesting, we can definitely put you in touch. But if there's anybody in your world that, I love the term you use, patriotic money or patriotic intent, that want to help us thwart the oncoming and continuously probably improving threat of Russia and China. And that's not a political statement. I think it's a reality, right? And you please feel free to refer them over. to Scott directly. As you all know, we don't have any skin in the game here in terms of banking this. We're just glad to bring it to you. And then from a business development perspective, oftentimes family office money comes with help. Is there a, you know, is it easy to bounce back to that current customer page and then your prospective pipeline
Sure,
and
sure,
maybe just
absolutely.
draw a picture for the folks of where they might be able to refer you into and be your sales, easy, warm introduction sales team, so to
Yeah,
speak?
absolutely. I'm going to skip right back to that. Let me just skip through two,
Oh, yeah, no,
visuals
go
here.
ahead. Yeah, please.
One, pretty excited to have Al as a new advisor. He was the CTO of NATO. And with the whole DoD game, the more names that that you have on your advisory board that they know and trust, the better. So he's a big one. And then Starnes Walker, he was the CTO of the Navy's Cyber Command. Mike Brown, he was a rear admiral, and then he ran RSA Federal for Dell, or now Dell, I mean.
Hang on, we're not seeing this.
Oh, all right, I'll stop sharing and restart. All right, is that coming
There you
through?
go. There's Evan.
All right, this is Evan now. So Evan, he most recently grew and sold a company to LiquidNet that's in the investment management space, and he's really helping us understand the hedge funds and how we can bring what we've built into that world as well. All right, to answer your question, let me see if I can skip here. There we go. And yeah, so if you look into the data types that we're focused on, again, out of the gate, natural language, things like customer service call transcripts is something that every company is struggling with, and every company is showing a lot of interest in across verticals. I like to say that use case transcends verticals, but also just the notion that we started the company around for Wayfair is what's called voice of the customer, which is anything that a customer has written onto their websites, into social, what they say when they call in to customer service, all the chat bots and the chatter that comes from that, and distilling it down to some type of actionable analytics. Could be improving the support reps themselves. It could be improving some type of workflow. It could be analyzing gaps in the catalog that they need to address for the product side of things. And so that is something that actually a lot of these customers on here, believe it or not, all latch onto. Again, intentionally focused on retail and consumers. So this crop over here is where I spend most of my time when I'm focused on this area of my day. But certainly the financial services thread that I keep mentioning is pretty hot. And so some hedge funds, and I don't have them all listed here, are late stage, and some of the providers to the hedge funds like TipRanks, who analyzes sell side reports, are also good conduits. And speaking of conduits, I don't think I've even mentioned yet our channel strategy. So going direct to DoD doesn't make a lot of sense. What we're doing with the initial R&D and innovation side of things is fine, but to get to real big programs of record, we need big brothers. And so Deloitte, Booz Allen, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, a lot of the big defense contractors have taken a liking to what we're doing and are including us on their teams for big proposals. For example, SAIC has one in that we should find out any day now. It went in the end of last year for a $2 billion program. Deloitte runs what's called the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at DoD, which is getting a bulk of the money that I mentioned earlier. They're the hub for all AI. And Deloitte and Booz Allen are really the ones running that. We are farther along with Deloitte than Booz Allen. Deloitte's already doing a pilot right now. Not only are they looking for it for the DoD side, but actually, and I'm really excited about this one, using it as their core tooling for everything to do with contact centers, powering chatbots, customer service call transcript analytics.
So in that case, for example, they're using some other company with the underlying technology, and you're going to be utility to make it more accurate and efficient bolted onto that. So
Yeah,
is that correct?
a lot of companies use either Amazon's Alexa, which is actually the project that really tipped us all off. Was we were working with Amazon when Alexa first came out, or Google, their AI platform, they call it Dialogflow. They have a new one out called Vertex. But yeah, our output goes directly into those bigger platforms that actually do the rest of the work. So our lane is creating training data for them.
And is IBM a competitor, or what's the big company that does a lot of technology for large companies?
Accenture?
Accenture, but no, the guy out in California that got really rich and owns an island in Hawaii. I'm sorry.
Oracle?
Yeah. Oracle, yeah.
Yeah, Larry Ellison. I actually had a friend that went to his house. It's ridiculous. But he said there are 300 people that are just there to make sure that the house is operating.
I like that.
And when he travels, you like this one. When he travels, he has his Ferrari shipped ahead of time. So he's driving his own cars.
Listen, money is just a tool.
Anyway, so no, they're not really competitors. No, we haven't seen a lot of competition from the big clouds, although that's certainly a risk, is that they come out with something like Jaxon. But really what the clouds, IBM cloud specifically, global business services within IBM is a different story. They're a consulting arm of IBM, and they want to do all the human labeling. They want to do all the labor that comes with that. But specifically IBM cloud, Azure, AWS, they make all their money off of processing power. How can they get their compute infrastructure to make them more money? And actually we expedite the process of getting models into production. So they start making more money quickly, because to power an AI costs a lot more than powering any old application.
Yeah. Wow. We have a question here. If I can just interrupt real quick.
Yeah.
One of our guests is very bullish on the space and thought the presentation is great. We're not over yet. There has been a few companies launching in the data labeling space. You mentioned a few larger ones. How do you feel your approach differs overall from companies like Scale, Snorkel, and others? In simple.
Awesome question. Awesome question. Obviously, someone knows the space. So speaking of Scale, Snorkel, and Labelbox, and some of the others. So most of these, even Scale, they just raised 325 million. You look into it, they still have a bunch of humans behind the scenes, and their revenue model is tied to it. They charge 8 cents per every label that they produce. And that's a revenue model that eventually will catch up with them, and I think will bite them. But certainly they're competitive. We even see them at DoD. They're not the crowdsourced humans that they use at DoD. They're a special subset that they house in a secure location, but still it's a whole bunch of humans. Same thing with all of these players on the left side of the bar here. The real tech threats are companies like Abacus, not so much Snorkel actually. We have Snorkel in our pipeline. They open sourced it when the researchers were at Stanford. We have it, we use it, it's great. But it's only a starting point, really. All they do is allow humans to impart their wisdom through the form of a heuristic, which we support as well. But we think that it's not so hard to label a little bit of data to then be able to do the semi-supervised and unsupervised data augmentation that Jaxon does, which I didn't really get into during my presentation. I didn't want to go too deep technically, but certainly we have a leg up over Snorkel. The one that I feel most threatened by is Abacus. They're Silicon Valley. They just raised a bunch of money. Eric Schmidt is one of their investors, and they're taking a very similar approach to us. I mean, this is a very well-known problem. So a lot of startups are going to emerge, and not just NLP, because we're getting into images as well. And so there are certainly competitive pressures here. It's a little bit of a land grab. As far as our edge against them, we have 2 patents pending. Not just non-provisional, they're both provisional patents pending. One is on Smart Split, which is a way of carving off the test set from the training set so you can ensure the accuracy of the model, not just in the lab, but actually in production. Another is around the notion of the collection, which is every time a model is built on Jaxon, we pool it as an available asset to pull into another use case. So it lends itself to reuse. And these large data science teams that we're selling into, they're buried with requests from across the organization. And they have a backlog of projects they just have to chew away at. The faster they can chew through those projects, the better. So labeling as well as reusing what they've already built. Great example is Wayfair. The first thing they built, and I was flashing it up here, is a voice of the customer use case around return comments. If I go up to this, when you go to return something at Wayfair, you have to free-form text right in why you're returning it. And so we created this classifier for them. That's technically what they're called. That's the AI model. But now they turn and they want to create a chat bot that can handle returns. 80% of the problem's already been solved in the previous model. Why not reuse it? And so Jaxon's supporting that in this, what we call the collection. The National Science Foundation is hopefully going to be funding us for some of that work. We got the green light recently. And then the way that we take data, a real example, and then in a synthetic way, we create variations of that example. Some people call this synthetic labeling. We call it unsupervised data augmentation. And that's something relatively unique to us. Even Abacus doesn't do that yet. And then the way that we've structured this, and we've been at this for longer than most of these companies, the way we've architected it is to keep pace with all the innovation coming out there. So almost every day you see something being announced by Google or someone else. And so how can we incorporate that into our pipeline in an efficient way? And so we've worked hard on the architecture so that we are really algorithm agnostic. So it grows with state of the art. That's what SODA is.
Well, it just struck me. I have a very pedestrian example. Family Office Insights, a website crashed over the weekend, and I just happened to go on to do something, and there was a SSL certificate missing or something very easy like that. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I actually had to call them 4 times because every time they fixed it, they didn't fix it. So I actually was the one calling customer service, and they must have had something like what you're doing, but probably a person where a quality control person texted me, or a machine that said, it looks like you called more than once, twice, maybe even 3 times, and is everything okay? Like, what did we screw something up? So I thought that was just incredible, right?
Yeah.
So that's
it's stuff like
sort of
that
thing you could
the
expedite.
chatbots will be able to do.
Say it again, I interrupted you.
It's stuff like that the chatbots will be able to do. And you're right, oftentimes it's still a human behind the scenes doing it. But the goal is to automate as much of this as possible, or at least, and this is what we've learned, take it as far along down the conversation as possible so that the human's time is optimized.
Yeah, super cool stuff. So I hope that many of you who are listening have thought along the same lines that I am thinking, not only to get involved as an investor, but some potential business development stuff. We do need to wrap it up, Scott, but you want to just have a closing comment, and then I'll make sure everybody gets in touch with you. And then I have things I wanted to chat with you about.
Yeah, no, I just welcome the opportunity to talk with anyone about what we're doing. I'm in full-on networking mode, so even if it's not a direct investment right away, I'd still love to talk with you. If there are opportunities for any of our portfolio companies that we can give lift to, I welcome that as well. And I'm just excited for what we've built and where we're going. I have a lot of passion behind this, and I know that we're on to something great. And the team behind me is incredible, and I'm excited to continue to grow it.
Super, super cool stuff. I love it. Well, thanks for having have us host you. And like I said, I'll be in touch, and I'll make sure everybody, you get in touch with everybody on the program here. And as I always say, thanks for sharing with us the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. So till next time. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care, Arthur.
Bye.
Thank you again.